אני אפנה קודם ליואל, למרות שאתם האורחים שלנו, אבל יואל בדרך לשדה התעופה, אז נתפוס אותו ממש ברגע האחרון, קצת לקח לנו יותר זמן ממה שחשנו. ויואל, יש שתי נקודות שמעניין אותי לשמוע את ההתחלה לגביהם. אחד, שמענו פה בין השורות, שמשהו השתנה בין השישה לשבעה באוקטובר.
Something changed.
אנחנו חוזרים לדיון על
In the context of normalization, we're going back to normalization as a topic. So what changed after 7th of October in the Saudis' vision of this topic? And whether still there is a possibility to reach this or that sort of normalization in the close period of time until the elections. Elections in the United States, before the campaign in the US becomes more intense. We have like 3 months or something. Well, hi, I'll try to answer those questions really. And one of the results of the war of 7th of October that the cost of normalization became higher for Israel. I'm talking about the Palestinian context, and you can see that in different statements of the Saudis. The Saudi monarchy is aligning with the Arabic public opinion, and we know where they are right now. They're in a very bad historically place at that point, as far as I remember. Very few know, very few work on that the price for the Saudis changed as well. So normalization is on the table. Still there, not because of us, because of the American pressure, really. The price the Saudis are asked to pay in few aspects is climbed up. It's much higher price. The Saudis are forced to show involvement. Again, we don't know the details really at this point. But behind the curtains, under the table, they are required to show more involvement in the Palestinian arena, rehabilitation of Gaza. Some would say the Saudis also required to pay a price to the public opinion, the Palestinian opinion, the Arabic opinion, you know, and the service that Shkaki is doing in the Palestinian Authority and others at the Arabic Street. Among the Palestinian Saudis are maybe the least beloved country after the Emirates. This is pretty much the order. This is at the bottom of the sympathy. But it's important for them to gain the legitimacy from the Palestinians for their status in the Muslim world. 95% of the citizens in the Arabic countries in the Gulf as well against normalization, against the model of Abraham Accords. There was always a gap between the regimes that signed agreements with us and the civilians in those regimes, and this gap is just growing. And in order to get closer to the civilians standing, you see various expressions from the Saudis that we never heard before, very decisive, less vague statements. Before 7th of October, they had a sort of maneuvering space they kept for themselves, so it was quite expanding, and the requirements from Israel were X. Now the X plus 1 honored. Those statements will be hard for them, the Saudis, to actually retract. I'm not sure what is X plus 1, what is X1 month. In the past, the requirement was something vague, some kind of vague promise of Israelis, according to Saudi sources. Again, some vague promise. Now they want irreversible steps towards creation of the Palestinian state. They don't want promises any longer. They want actual actions. They are fed up with the promises, as they say. And those declarations are binding for them. At a certain point, I guess, they will have to really back it up. But within a few minutes that I have before I run away, I want to look at the Saudis. What do they want? And one can actually say that the Saudis mostly want the Americans. The Saudis want the dividends from the Americans. They want to march forward the 2030 vision program that is actually quite stuck, and it's important for them to bring foreign capital and investment. Getting closer to the United States, that's what matters to them. Let's put it frankly on the table. We know that from previous agreements, all the strategic carrots that they asked for, some of them are very problematic for us, really. But this particular period of time, Mohammed bin Salman, if you would have asked him today, without anyone hearing, do you want normalization with Israel? Do you actually want it? He would say no. per se normalization Israel and Saudis, but since they are under American pressure and since they're getting all those toys he really desires, he will agree to normalization. You need to understand the spirits of this. We are coming from the Emirates. We are not very favorable there at that point among them. Israel is perceived as toxic. The wet dream of Ben Salman is to get everything he wants. He would have asked to improve his relationship with the United States to get everything he wants without normalization with Israel. Americans insist, not because of Israel, but because of the United States as well, to sell normalization in the Congress. In order to bring an agreement with the Saudis in Washington, because the Saudis are toxic there, you need to bring Israel to the table. What are the advantages for us and for the Saudis? And what are the disadvantages of such a possible normalization agreement? So what will we get out of it? What Israel hopes to receive in normalization agreements? So first of all, the largest economy in the region. They're part of the G20, they want to become part of G8. Involvement in Gaza with God's help, really, they don't want to do that. It's a headache for the Saudis, and if you would ask them, they're really not interested. I'm not familiar with any Arabic state, maybe the Emirates, but we'll talk about that later on in the next panel. Israel will get legitimacy, political legitimacy in this region and above it, and it's also the Islamic legitimization, and Ronan mentioned that. Security components. Israel will receive a lot of components. We saw that on 14th of April, just a hint of it. And you can get much more, and those things are extremely important. Additional matter that Israel will receive is an improvement of its regional status of the United States. If the United States will manage to bring closer there Saudis and other Gulf countries, it will upgrade the status of the United States here in comparison to China and Russia, and will push away Tehran even further aside. What is the price Israelis have to pay? People constantly talk about the political price that Israel is supposed to pay. Israel has to say something that is binding this way or not about the Palestinians. The topic that I feel very passionately about and will work upon it in our think tank is a nuclear matter, proliferation. We know that the Saudis insist to enrich uranium in their territory, with American restriction, of course, and American supervision of different sorts, but still, even with American restrictions, is a taboo that will be broken. Other countries, some of our friends, some of North, will ask as well. The Emirates that gave up the uranium enrichment, what will they say when uranium will be enriched in Saudi soil? They will say, you know what, I want it as well, because I actually did agree to give up the enrichment of uranium in return for the reactors. So the weapons that are violating equilibrium, well, we may be capable of handling that, but it's also impacting our regional balance. What kind of model of normalization with the Saudi will be dictated? Is it the warm model? I would say it's almost the ultimate model that we have with the Emirates. I don't think so, really. I think the Saudis will be very gradual, very restricted. It will take years and years, and we'll receive maybe partial normalization, something that is called, by the way, they call it integration. They call it a regional integration, not normalization. It's quite an interesting choice of words, really. This is their choice, and it also, I think, shows the nature of the final product they intend to give us. You want to ask a question? I have another minute, but it may bring additional countries to the circle of normalization, because the Saudis is a barrier of the expansion of the circle. It's not just in this context, but it may be some kind of tiebreaker, you know. But I want to say something else. The strategic current situation of the State of Israel doesn't require us to bring some kind of strategic achievement that will be visible, very significantly, highly visible. I don't know how to call it, with ramifications of the future of the region versus the main problem that we have in this region. It's still not the Hamas, it's Iran, really. And you mentioned that, of course. Yeah, I am an enthusiastic supporter of normalization. Even after the 7th of October, it still has advantages and prices we need to pay, and disadvantages as well. I think we need to pay those prices. I think it's I'm a supporter of normalization. If we'll reach the hostage deal and be able to declare end of war at high intensity, and the pictures from Gaza will calm down the public opinion of Arabic countries, making it much harder for the Saudis. They have to play the game with their audience and the other Arabic audiences, and makes it much harder for the Israelis. If we'll solve some of the so-called tactical issues, we'll be able to get to the strategic matter. Inshallah. And we heard yesterday the Saudi foreign minister that said that the future of Israel will only if the Palestinian state will be created alongside of it, whether will it be the only way. But I would like to move to you, Ruth. Ruth is the fellow researcher in Misgav Institute, by the way. I have only representatives of Misgav Institute, so look, this is lovely. We'll try to argue amongst ourselves. Yeah, we do that a lot, really, I'm sure. You're from Ra'anana, so it doesn't count, you know.
עלה פה כבר הנושא מחיר הכניסה הזה.
This enterprise that is so expensive for the state of Israel, we saw that Mr. Negbe, the council, he was maneuvering here on this matter. So, what is so scary in the eyes of Israelis of stating that we will be willing for normalization with the Saudis to promote or to ignite a political process on the Palestinian arena? I don't understand this fear. I don't understand this horror of this statement. Can you explain to me what's so horrifying? I can try. So, there is a political fear to address a large audience that experienced a tremendous disaster on 7th of October. I think that it's very difficult to look into the eyes of people and to persuade them there is a partner. Personally, myself, I don't think that there is a partner there at this particular period of time. And this is difficult for me to state, really. I'm not saying it from the political... I'm saying it with fear. And that wasn't even a question, that was a statement, but it was a correct statement. Incitement, hatred, education, messages that are super anti-Israeli. And I'm an expert in Egypt. I lived for 3 years in Egypt. This is the country that, in fact, there is a peace agreement with. And I'm the last one to say that this is not strategically important, military important. We don't have war with the Egyptians, of course, but we never insisted to eradicate this hatred and incitement. And today we are in this certain situation, and if it's possible, by the way, can I undermine a little bit this maybe regular thinking, way of thinking, those little squares we all arrange in our heads, those frameworks of thinking that we're so inclined towards for so often, and we forgive ourselves this cliche thinking, we constantly follow this path, we fall into this particular direction. Let's try to create a different box. We are allowed, if we are in the field, in my vision, of course, and if someone wants from us X and this X today is not to create any collateral damage, innocent civilians, humanitarian aid, sign peace agreements that in my eyes will not be normalization at all, really, but it will have other dividends, strategic dividends. For example, this front lines against Iran, which is obviously the source of all the problems.
אם אנחנו מסתכלים היום על כל מה שכולנו אומרים, אנחנו כל הזמן אומרים, המדינה הזאת לא יכולה לעשות בגלל דעת הקהל.
It can't be done because of the public opinion. Arabic public opinion is against us. That's true. It's an axiom. The public opinion of the Arabic community is against. They hate us. The public and the streets can't stand us. They are fed constantly into the veins with hatred, mad, insane hatred, to such an extent that it allows them. A child, he's not a child, he's a man, will be calling his mother and will bragging that he murdered this and that many Jews. It reaches a psychotic level of hatred. And we are, from the other hand, do not see this card or this requirement as part of the general game we're playing here. So it's a chess game at that point. So we're undermining for a second why we cannot demand that. Part of our requirements will be the halt of this insane delusional incitement, not just in Gaza, but also in Judea and Samaria and Jordan, where, by the way, in the Eastern Jerusalem, which is obviously not that violent, but it's also quite horrible, less than Gaza Strip though, but Judea and Samaria and Jordan, but Judea, Samaria, and Jordan and Gaza are the worst, but what about Egypt? I agree with you completely. But again, I will be getting to the point. I'm not running away from the question, really. One of the things that you mentioned here, two words, Palestinian state or entity, Palestinian entity, I didn't use those terms. Palestinian horizon. Yeah, political horizon for the Palestinians. That's the term. I'm not afraid of this word. I am not afraid of this word, but again, to such an extent, let's put on the table all the conditions that you discussed. There is certain conditions that are extremely legitimate, which is demilitarization. That is very difficult. It seems for us that, okay, demilitarization, so in fact you don't really want some kind of political horizon. No. One can state political horizon. We don't actually, and it's been said, by the way, by the chairman of the Council of National Security, not myself, but the person who is in fact, you can't really be concerned with his intentions. He doesn't want parts of land of Israel or state of Israel. He said, yes, definitely, we don't want military occupation or military presence forever in Gaza, yeah. So maybe we are willing to allow and facilitate political horizon and something different. So what kind of Palestinian entities, Palestinian families, what kind of families in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria, facing this challenge? Anyone who is an expert on Arabic culture, no, it's an impossible situation. We need a period of time, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that. And the decade of preparations of renewal messages. So we want to build a path into the future for the next horizon that is practical and possible. But why shouldn't we say that? Did we kill someone? Did we rape someone? Did we hurt someone? Maybe on a political aspect, but it seems to me that in return for those things, I think that one should be stating that we're willing to face the political horizon. Okay, thank you. I'm asking in Hebrew and you will be answering in English. So let's go back. Aryeh, by the way, is one of those people that are currently... I think we should replace the mediator. So Aryeh, you're constantly in touch, economically speaking.
שמענו פה בין השורות ולא לגמרי הבנתי שמשהו השתנה בראייה שלהם בין השישה לשבעה באוקטובר. אתה יכול לרגע לשתף אותנו בתור אחד שנמצא במגעים עם סעודי ועוסק איתם בעניינים שמתחברים לאירוע?
Sorry for my Hebrew. I live in Renana. Yeah, זה יותר קל. I spend more time in Saudi Arabia than in Renana. I think to just give context to this, after the Abraham Accords, or as they began on August 13, 2020, the feeling in the Middle East in all of the countries, or many of the countries, was a question of when and not if. And depending on the timing of when was the level of enthusiasm that the street or the participants in these various countries had to connect with Israel in what I would call warm peace, not in cold peace. There wasn't an issue of that. If you would have asked in January 19th of 2021, so the day before President Biden took office, if you were to be in Riyadh, you would have heard from the people in Riyadh, not here and not here, but here, you would have heard that we are interested in normalization. On January 21st, after President Biden's inaugural address, they said we are not interested in normalization, but it might happen anyways. The reason is because in President Biden's inaugural address, he said that he was going to make the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, a pariah, an enemy of the United States of America. And America is the key linchpin of how these agreements came about and will continue to exist. A year went by, and it became not only it might happen, but we're less interested in it happening. And October 6th and 7th have almost nothing to do with this. And since October 7th, not on the day, but in 5 months past, I was in Saudi on Wednesday last week. The answer was, we are not interested in peace with Israel. This is not something that we want. But if the leadership decides, I hope that we get a lot for it. And the answer is if we think in America, where I follow most of the news, it's about 85% negative towards Israel and about 15% positive. In the Middle East, in Saudi specific, it's 99.9999999% negative, and the other 0.0001 is a glitch in the algorithm. Just to understand, I'll give you, can I give one? And I was interviewed on Sky News Arabia the week after October 7th, so it must have been the 15th or 16th. And I don't do interviews in Arabic because I don't speak Arabic, slicha. But I had a friend on who was going to translate with me to make sure the translation was authentic. The first question was, isn't it fair that so many Jews were raped on October 7th because of all of the Israeli soldiers that had raped Palestinians for the last 30 years? So I said, I apologize, can you translate that again? That can't be an accurate translation. And they translated it again, it was the right translation. I said, I apologize, I thought I was on a news station, not on Hitler's propaganda network, and I hung up. I did not think they were going to call me back. They did. A week later, they called me back, and I was prepared. They did a study and came out with a documentary, How Racist Are Israeli Soldiers? This is the pro-Western Gulf network. So how racist are Israeli soldiers? Every other case of occupation, there's systematic rape of soldiers of the local people. Israeli soldiers are so racist, they will not rape the locals. So I began the conversation with asking, are they familiar with the documentary that they came out with? You can have it one way or the other, and the answer is that unless somebody's going to call, as we say in America, balls and strikes, say the difference between emet and sheker, these lies just run, and they continue to run. And this is a challenge. The positive part, and you didn't ask me this, but I'll get to this. This can flip in a second. If you go to Saudi and you ask in any room, who has a driver's license for longer than 7 years, there won't be a single woman lift up their hand. If you ask who has been to a cafe with their husband or their girlfriend, there won't be anybody in the room, not boy or girl, who's raised their hand if it's been more than 8 years. The change goes from literally day to day. I was there 6 times since October 7th. Each time is radically different. This can change with the right leadership. I have a lot more to say, but that wasn't your question.
אתה בעצם אומר
So in fact, you're basically saying that in the end, this is the decision of the crown prince, whatever he decides, everyone will be following.
It's a good part about being a king, right?
כן.
And depends who will be the president of the United States. Aryeh, another question I would like to ask you. Is it correct that we need to look differently upon the normalization agreement with the Saudis in comparison to the Abraham Accords and normalization with the Abraham Accord? Is it the same? Or is it something completely different?
So I'll be very clear about this. I wake up every morning and I pray that President Biden will be the greatest president of my lifetime because that's good for America. I'm a Republican. I didn't vote for him and I won't vote for him. But if he's the greatest president, it's good for the world. So far, those prayers have not gone in the direction that I've wanted, from my perspective. When the Biden administration couldn't use the word Abraham Accords, right, until the day after the Afghanistan debacle, and then have not called the ambassadors from the Abraham Accord countries into the White House to honor them, right? And when we, the U.S., didn't call Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed the day after the rocket attack the whole premise of the Abraham Accords, not the Trump Accords, not the Republican Accords, but the Abraham Accords that countries signed on to, being bipartisan, peace for peace, being something that all Americans would embrace, is gone. The question is what will exist in the future, and that's a very fascinating question. There's a pathway where Saudi should be part of that, and you'll have 15 other countries join. I want to mention one thing that I think is two things that I think is incredibly important. I sit in this room with heroes of the Jewish people. I know a lot of your resumes. This is an incredible thing that in the last 2,000 years we couldn't even contemplate. And I sat here for an hour listening to Israel thinking that it is a spectator in its own history. And that was incredibly sad to me. What will these guys do for us, or what will those guys do for us? That's not the Israel that I know. It's not the Israel that I love. It's not the Israel that I respect, frankly. There were, for 4 years, the key to the Middle East ran through Jerusalem. The last 3.5 years, the key to the Middle East runs away from Jerusalem. And until that changes, everything you're talking about is irrelevant. And Israel has the ability to reframe that if you choose to do that. It's certainly within your ability.
Okay, thank you.
Asher, okay, your turn. So we do talk all the time about this bilateral approach. Us and the Palestinians for many years we had a bilateral approach, and now we're trying to maintain some kind of, that's true, we do have the American engine. We're trying to maintain a bilateral approach with the Saudis and through which to change the Middle East. Maybe a different approach is required. Thank you. I also want to thank you for this fruitful discussion between two of the think tanks. I agree with Aryeh and Yoel about the situation. Instead of being optimistic, we need to be creative. And in fact, because of the very negative public opinion, because of the price is higher, I disagree that it's only some kind of general intention. I think the Saudis want actually irreversible steps, not necessarily the recognition of the Palestinians, but specific steps, and the cease of warfare, which will be a catastrophe for the state of Israel to stop fighting now when Hamas is still remained sovereign. It's very possible, unfortunately, that under current situation, and we'll see what happens after the elections, we can't move forward with a bilateral route. That means that we can't move forward. There are ways that will be under or above the bilateral with the players from other directions, and again, it's a multilateral process, and there are very significant processes that are happening in the Middle East, and this is the IMEC corridor, Europe and Middle East corridor that will be connecting in a vision the West and the East. Trade, transportation, logistics, energy, and media and communications. So here in Israel, we're really used to seek various initiatives that remain just a declaration, but here as well, this is something that's actually happening in front of our eyes. And the Indians want it tremendously, but also the American interest, because it can be an alternative to the Chinese BRI channel, and the Indians and the Saudis and the Emirates, they sit together, they signed agreements. And you need to bear in mind that the Saudis agreed to open the aerial space for the Israeli airlines. They didn't say that because we love Israelis, we want to promote normalization with Israel. No, they said we want to be a transportation hub on a global level. Therefore, we must open an aerial space for all the airlines. The advantage in IMEC initiative and additional initiatives of this sort, that it may allow the Saudis to say, okay, no, so, okay, it's not about normalization with Israel still, when there is war and etc. But since we want to be a part of this initiative that can change the Middle East and the world, we must allow the lorries or energy from Israel or commodities go through our territory. The problem is that the state of Israel is not willing, and I think at this particular moment there are hundreds of Jordanian and Egyptian lorries that are waiting at the border because we can't, we don't have an ability to receive them. I was in Nitzana checkpoint, and they don't have phones with the Egyptian side there. We sent each other notes there, so we want to be part of it, which is emerging right now in front of our eyes. We must pull ourselves together and to decide that our regulation bureaucracy will be alleviated, so we'll be participating in those great projects. On the low below the ground of bilateral political diplomatic full relationships, we need to look at the interim steps that are public, that are not under the table, because it's happening anyway, but something that is less declarative than actual diplomatic relations. It can be steps that are restricted and limited to certain geographical areas, whether it's Bali in Indonesia or Binyam in Saudi Arabia. It can be some interim step for commodities, French commodities with Jordanian drivers and Jordanian lorries that are passing through Israel, for example. So maybe some things that it's important to promote at this particular stage, maybe even if it is not a full bilateral diplomatic relations. And as someone else said here, the involvement of third parties is crucial in this point, and Aryeh didn't mention that, but he is a special envoy of the American administration for economical peace. Then America were willing to invest, not just the Americans, the Indians, the British, the Asian countries as well. A lot of our capacity is to promote things, considering the tension that exists because of the war, will be dependent to our allies, to what extent we'll manage to persuade our allies to be involved. And therefore, by the way, if President Biden will be re-elected, it's one thing. But if President Trump or former President Trump will be re-elected, then the biggest challenge will be of how can we persuade the American administration that continuation of the investment and encouragement of integration is actually integration and normalization. It's also an American interest that will be serving America first. I think it's possible, really, because it's an alternative to China, and it's and this is a challenge. How can we encourage the normalization in this sense?
בסך הכל יש מגוון רחב של אינטרסים משותפים שכן מהווים תשתית טובה לקדם הסכם כמו נורמליזציה והסכמים.
And how can we promote those agreements that are expanded and in general? Now we're stuck with this war, and we heard that from the National Council, National Security Advisor. We need to prove that we know how to address Hamas. And in general, being an asset, again, I want to talk about your approach, the asset, State of Israel as an asset, yourself, ma'am. You were in Cairo and you served in Egypt, and we were perceived as an asset in this region. That was a result of the fact that allegedly Israel considered to be then a very stable country. Israel guaranteed, promised that they know how to contain the Palestinians, to push them to the corner, that Israel was the only one that faced Iran and its proxies and coped with them proudly, and the rest just looked away. And suddenly our level is we're not the strongest, we can't cope our problems on our own. How will it impact we don't have the privilege of actually choosing it. So what do we do? No one is looking for a weak ally. So obviously I should have said that before. I'm sorry, we have a little bit of a technical difficulty. So no one wants a weak ally. No one is looking at us as weak. They don't need us when we are weak. If we will not clarify in a very clear manner that we're capable of winning, which is quite a difficult trap for us, but it's necessary for so many reasons, really. Saudis are looking at us and they intend to normalize, or not, by the way. When we talk about India, India is flirting lovely with Iran. Egypt, that hates Iran, is flirting with Iran at that point. So this flirtatious behavior is with Iran because of the current very visual weakness of the United States. we must make sure not just the deterrence, but there's some kind of a decisive result. I don't believe that a decisive tactical victory versus Hamas is enough. It's not tactical, really. And it's a strategic game, and I would say we need a prominent result. Because otherwise it's just a distraction that Iran created. Strategy should be much more expanded than just a tactical victory over Hamas. And what makes me quite concerned is the fact that we don't have such a strategy. We don't have enough of a good partners for the strategy, really. But the elements, clear-cut elements of the very initial components of the decisive strategic victory, this is first of all the full submission of Hamas. We don't have any other ability. So we must reach a decisive and prominent result. A defeat of Hamas. Aryeh, I would like to ask you, pardon my French, but I'm not sure whether you will understand it in Hebrew or not. It's called Fata Morgana. Biden administration sells us a story. Just say yes. Just take the train of normalization. Everything will be hunky-dory. It will be end of war, return of hostages. We'll calm down the north. We will push Hezbollah 20 kilometers from the border up to north. Iran will be all giddy and laughing happily, and they will cease using the proxies and the proxy war. Everything will be hunky-dory. I can't believe how we'll all fit into one picture.
No. Oh, slicha. I
just told my kids that I will doing it in Hebrew. No.
Look, there is a, first of all, even if, let's just imagine that my kid went to sleep last night, lost a tooth. I put money under the pillow. The tooth fairy is real. It wasn't me. So the tooth fairy has now sold you this story that this is all possible. And by the way, I've sat on the other side of the table. I know what happens in the United States of America wants one of our friends to do something. The tools in our tool belt are expansive and extensive and very, very hard to resist. The pressure, assuming that this is what President Biden wants to do, are enormous. And don't minimize that for a second, no matter how humorous I find the thing is. Let's assume that it worked. Just for a moment, let's assume that it worked. There's something else that we're forgetting altogether. Winston Churchill describes moments in history as a hinge of history, where the whole world can go this way or the whole world can go that way, depending on the activity. When Israel makes peace with Saudi Arabia correctly, the world as we know it is forever changed. Not partially changed, not sort of changed, not integratsia, but the entire world is different and will be forever different more. This is like going to the supermarket and having a 20% coupon. It makes you feel good for about a minute. It is to me insulting and displays a lack of knowledge of the region that these things can happen, and as long as it lasts long enough for us to not be here anymore, that this would work. And all of the people in the region know that's the same thing. They just don't say it out loud. And it behooves the leadership of Israel and the people of Israel and both of your incredible organizations just to speak the truth. This is what it's for. And again, even if it were to work, it would not be good. And it won't work, so it is worse. And if you want to look just more specifically about this moment, I can't undersell this. The vibe, my wife gets upset with me because I love Saudi Arabia a lot. And she says, why? I said, well, it's just like Tel Aviv, but the girls wear more clothes. Okay, that was funnier in my house. The enthusiasm about tomorrow is far more than to put up with the aggravation of today. Every country has its problems today. If you're excited about tomorrow, you're willing to deal with today's garbage to be able to get to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. That Israel and Saudi have in common. If you can take UAE and Bahrain and Saudi and Israel, that will eventually resolve all of your problems. The rising tide will indeed raise all ships. The best thing for the Palestinians should be rooting for this to happen. But we also know, and it would behoove everybody here to say this very clearly, nobody actually cares about the Palestinians. Certainly not anybody telling Israel what to do, because if they did, they would be rooting for you to destroy Hamas. But they're not. They're rooting for you to stop, so Hamas stays in power. We built a pier. Why did we build a pier? How did Israel allow America to build a pier? Like, these are nonsensical things that if you don't say them out loud, people start believe them. So now you've got this whole sipur that all of these things can happen, and now if you stand up against it, you're against peace. You're not a believer. We let all of these non-truths add up, and suddenly you start talking about the tooth fairy enough that suddenly people start believing it. It's a disaster.
Okay, thank you. אחרון חביב
So last but not the least in our panel, Asher, I would like to ask you a question in the context of the previous question. Can it actually congeal? Is there a way using which we can recruit the Arabic countries to take responsibility for Gaza, for the rehabilitation, for stabilization of Gaza? It really depends upon us, because those countries, in fact, they know very well who Hamas are. They have no illusions about who they are. We have more illusions about Hamas than them. They're not going to adopt Hezbollah model of having an actual technocratic and, I don't know, Palestinian Authority, international coalition government, whatever you call it, when Hamas is remaining as an actual real dominant power underground. But if Hamas will still continue to exist, but it won't be a dominant power in the field, it's possible. By the way, there is a very interesting discussion. Someone said that I think it was the Emirates said yes, and Saudis will say no, maybe yes, but the younger crown prince is more, I don't know, he has all the aspirations, ambitious, and etc. Because Gaza is quite a project. But I think those countries can be very ambitious in this sense, and they understand the value of Gaza. That is a stabilized factor. If for it to succeed, for NEOM to succeed, Saudis require this stability in the region in order to attract the international investment. So it's actually a scenario that is possible. Israel can actually obtain the roles they wanted to dismantle the Hamas regime and etc. Maybe the parties will be willing to participate, but truthfully, even people maybe would have wanted to do that or don't think that the two-state solution is the best solution. They will never step in without the Palestinian legitimacy that they will receive. They will not join if they will perceive as someone who is actually undermining the national aspirations of Palestinian people. It shouldn't be necessarily just the Palestinian Authority. But yeah, collapse of the Hamas governance for sure, not to have Hamas running around, and they need a legitimacy of Palestinians, the clan, maybe the clans or local factors that will allow them to be part of it. So thank you so much, Ruth, Aryeh, Asher. Just one thing in common in understanding of all of us, that the main goal, immediate goal of ours is to